Well, welcome back to the channel. If you've been keeping up with this WD restoration project, you know we've gotten to the rear axles, and the last video that you saw, I was pulling apart the axle, the drive gear, and getting all that stuff ready for replacement. So that's what we're going to be doing today, is reassembling that. So if that's something that you're interested in seeing, stick around because it's coming up. All right, so I've spent a few hours getting all of my parts cleaned up, each of the housings and the old pan portion underneath the housing, all my bolts, my drum. Didn't do anything with the drive gears, they were fine, and the axles. So I guess the first step that we're gonna have to do is, we've got one bearing that's bad, and that's right here on the end. And you can see that. I had a ton of shavings in that end cap. So we're going to be pulling this off and putting a new one on. The race is okay, we'll go ahead and reuse it. Just FYI too, if you do have a bad race, they're quite expensive. So hopefully if you're doing this project, you won't have any issues with any bearings or races. But anyway, that's the first step. We'll get that done. And then we'll start installing some seals, and then we'll just step right back through the process that we did when we disassembled this. All right, so getting ready to work on the bearing, and the rest of the bearing basically just came loose. So I've tried driving it and it won't move. So the next step I'm gonna do, I'm just gonna cut this inner part of that bearing, just put me a slice in it with the side grinder, and then I'll take a wedged punch and we'll try to split it open there and take it off. So that's what I'm getting ready to do. All right, so that broke it free. Kind of see it twist there just a bit. You can see it put that crack right in it. So now we can go ahead and pull that one off. I just have to tap it. I thought I'd be able to get it with the pliers, but all right. So I got that off of there. Just gonna clean that up, and then we'll go ahead and we'll stick our new bearing on. All right, so I got my new AGCO bearing. It's number 7020988-9, and we'll be going ahead and put that on. I've got my shaft there held in the vise, but down at the floor level, I've got a jack stand that's actually taking the pressure as I drive this thing on. So make sure that your cone is out, because on the outside here we'll drive that cup on there. So we're just gonna just tap it in place here. Okay, so we're down to the edge of the axle. I still have to go down, I don't know, maybe 1/8 of an inch or so. I'm gonna grab a socket like I've used in the past, let that fit over there, and then we'll finish it up. All right, so 1¼ inch socket fits nicely on there, so I'm just gonna hold that in place. And you can hear the distinct difference there, and we can see where we've got it driven down to. So I'm just gonna check the bottom side here and just make sure that we're good shape and it's tied up against the machined portion of the shaft. So we are good. All right, so let's slide back over to the main bench here and we'll start the assembly. All right, so we can see down in there we've got one seal, and that's the inner seal that is on the inside of where the tube goes over to the axle housing connection on the tractor. So we need to drive that seal out, and we'll drive it out looking through the outside port right here. So to do so, I'll just take another socket. I got an extension that'll fit right on there, and then I'll just give it a few hits and that thing should pop right out of there. Try to get you down here on the bottom side where you can see what exactly I am doing, and that seal is right up here. So let me just give that a couple hits here. that over there. Set the housing up right here so that you can see what we've got. Now it probably makes a little more sense on how that's connected. So right here is where that tube right here will bolt up and head over towards the tractor. So that's that inner sill. That's the one that I had leaking, that had oil in that tube, and then it was getting down into the brake housing section. So next step, we're just going to clean this up. The bearing and everything on this part of the shaft was fine. So when we install this, we'll actually be pushing in from this opening back towards the camera and through the tube. That's why that brake drum has to come off whenever you're replacing this sill, because you cannot do it without getting the tube and everything out of the way. So anyway, I got my new seal over here, and it is AGCO part number 702-25844. And let me get that thing opened up here. All right, so here's the new seal. It's all a complete seal here. So we're gonna have this connected just right like so. I'll make sure I get this thing in the right way. Yeah, so if it didn't have this shield on the back, that would be the spring, and that always goes towards the oil. So we'll have our numbers facing us, and that'll go right in that housing right there. And I may have enough weight on the housing to install this setting up. And I did. So I still need to get it countersunk. So I will just simply set this thing down on the bench here. Flipped over kind of like we had it earlier, but where I can get to it. And use that same, I like to have a bigger socket actually, so I can get more towards the outer. All right. Okay, so let's see where we're at now. Okay. Yep, that looks good. Okay, so we've got that seal installed. The next step, I would like to go ahead and put the tube on there before we feed the actual axle through here. And one reason is once I get that thing fed through, there's a lot of pressure right on our new seal because the axle is so long, it'll want to push down on it a little bit. So I want to make sure that I've got that tube in there on the back side of this thing. That way it's already pushed through and I'm not moving this housing around a whole lot with that axle in it. So let's go ahead and get that prepared next. And like I said, I've already got everything cleaned up. So I'll just lay this housing over here on its side. Get these out of the way. Okay, so right now, this ear needs to be pointed to the top because that's what mounts up your fender. So I need to rotate this thing. It looks like about 180 degrees. So we're going to be just like that. Those two will line up here, and then the other two down here will go where we've got our existing stud still in the housing. So I'm just going to slide those two together. They did mention, actually before I do that, they did mention in the book about putting some sealer on this surface. There used to be a gasket on that, on the early model WDs. And we don't need it on this one, but they did say to use some sealer. So let me grab my Permatex and we'll just throw a quick bead around that, and then we'll slide this together and get it bolted up. All right, so I got my Permatex. This little portion here of the axle sleeve is what they actually call this, fits inside there, so that's really where I need to have my sealant. So I'm just gonna, like I said, take some of that Permatex right around through there like this, and that will seal up that connection. All right, let me rotate this back where the ear is up, and those two will go in these two spots right here. All right, so I've went through and got all of my bolts and the studs in. There was 2 studs, if you recall, that were not in the housing. It's very important that when you install those, you use some Loctite. And then I had to use 2 nuts on there in order to get it turned and in place. If you look right down there on the inside of the housing, right here, it's kind of hard to see in here, and then on both sides, that's where those studs will stick through. And then if you look at the stud, if you happen to have it out, the threads are 2 different lengths on here. So we see we got a short end and a longer end. The short end, of course, will go into the housing like so, and I just put Loctite on there like that and put them in. So no big deal, pretty straightforward stuff. When you get done with those, I won't be able to do it right now. I have to wait till it's bolted up, but you need to torque those down to 125 foot-pounds. So make sure that, you know, when you get this thing back on the tractor, that you go ahead and you torque them up. All right, so now we are ready for the shaft to be pushed through. So let me slide over here to the shaft. In the manual, they do tell you to be cautious of the seal, that you're going to be sliding this through to go down to the other end. And just feeling that, I got a little bit of buildup right here on the edge. So I'm going to grab my drill and I'm going to just kind of knock that little edge off. And then they do mention about putting Scotch tape or something around where the snap ring for the backside of that brake drum ends up going. They do say to put something over that just to prevent that from causing an issue with the seal. So I'm going to grab my drill there, and we'll clean that surface up, and then we'll get it installed. All right, so I went ahead and put some Lucas on the portion of the shaft where the seal is going to be sealing up here, and then down on the other end right there where it's going to be sliding through, as well as the seal. And you're looking in the bottom of the axle housing, and I'm going to slide this in. We've got to take it in from the outside, and you'll see it go through there in just a second. So I'm just going to be real easy. I'm going to slide it through the seal. All right, so it is sliding through there, as you can see. I can see where that can be. You gotta be real careful with that. I'm lifting up on the other side here just to make sure that I'm pulling the pressure off of that seal. All right, so I am in the race on the outside there, or on the inside rather. Then over here on the outside, obviously that's got to go in a little bit further, and then we're going to take the race that goes around that bearing, and we'll just tap it into place. Okay, so I cannot feel any kind of in-play in that. So I'm gonna say we are set where we need to go. The end cap that we're gonna put in will be shimmed anyway, and that will set it. So let me grab my cap and my drill, and then we'll get that installed. All right, so I got my shims and my cap here and my hardware. We're gonna go ahead and let's get that started on here. Okay, our next step is assembling the drive gear and the axle. And so a couple prep things we can do prior to putting the shaft in, and that is, one, we'll stick our bearing back in, and then we'll go ahead and we'll drive our seal in as well. So let's go ahead and grab our bearing. The old bearing was fine, there was no issue with that, so it's going to go right back in place like so. And let me go ahead and grab my seal. The new seal from AGCO will be part number 702-18284. And I've already got this one opened up here. Remember that your spring side, which would be this open lip right here, goes towards the oil. So it'll go in like that. So let me get my hammer ready. We'll slide our bearing in there first, and then we'll go ahead and we'll get our seal started. That bearing's just kind of in my way. Let me grab one of my magnets here. I've used this magnet before. It's a rare earth magnet, and it is difficult for me to just separate it from metal. So hold that bearing in place. Okay, that's got us set. Now, obviously the axle's got to assemble through this, so once we get to a certain point, we're going to be pressing it in and onto the bearing that's already there. So our next step is to go ahead and get our drive gear, our spacer, and get all that ready, and then we'll slide it in the bottom of this housing and feed that axle through. So let me get that spun around here and ready to go. All right, so we're getting ready to slide that axle in. I've got my parts laid out here in order. Once we slide it through, we're first going to slip on the spacers to the right, then our drive gear with the coned portion going out. So you can see the cone that will go out towards the outside of the tractor. And then as that shaft comes through, we'll slip that snap ring right there on, and then it's going to come out the other end, or start to, and then we're going to have to start pressing that thing in, because we have to get that bearing that we just installed basically slid from this collar all the way back. So we got, what, probably less than an inch or so that it's got to slide on. So that's the biggest task, is getting that thing pressed on. I've already lubed everything up with Lucas. I've got my seal lubed up right there. So let's get started. Just take the shaft first, and we'll start it through. Be real careful of my seal. I'll try to get where you can see here. And then we're going to have the spacer. And I really need to have something. Well, it'll be okay. It's not on the seal. All right, we're going to try to slide this gear in here, and I probably should have done that first, actually. Just went ahead and got it in place. Let me see if that thing will set there. All right. Let me go ahead and slide the gear in. Just going to kind of roll in. Remember, the cone portion goes out. It's hitting right on the end of that thing. All right. So my spacer's already in there, which is good. All right, so I'm hitting on the back. There we go. And one thing, I'm glad they have this thing, the end of the shaft coned. the axle, I guess I should say. That right now is helping me quite a bit. All right, I've got it lined up with my axle shaft. Okay. All right. So we got it threaded on there. Wasn't too awfully bad. On the inside there, you can see right back in there, I'm going to start pushing this axle through, and that's where I've got to get the snap ring on, just on the shaft. I don't have to get it installed, obviously. Whoops. So let me back this thing back out. I'm probably gonna have to, oh no, will that fit through here? If it did, that would be nice. You could slide it right on the end there. I'm gonna back it back out just a little bit here. Hold it over that, slide everything back into place. My snap ring is now on the shaft where I can get it installed here after a while. And the portion of the axle right here is now started into that bearing. So you can see we got a ways that we need to push that thing on there. And then just looking at this here, it's a little bit sideways. We can see we're a little tight here. So we need to make sure we're good and square, because that gear right there is going to hold the axle down. All right, so I am going to get set up here, and try to drive that thing on first, and we'll see how that goes. I'll go ahead and slide this bearing on this other side here just to position the center alignment here. All right, so I'm centered up. I'm gonna go ahead and put my nut back in here. Try to get this around where you can see. Or my bolt, I've got that washer and the pin that holds that bearing. All right, let me see what size that is. I'm not sure. 7/8 it is. We'll load that up. All right, now what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go ahead and tap it over here on the back, outer side. The only downside to using this method is you cannot see. So the only way I can gauge off of really is this gear. And what I mean by that is this. Whenever the front side, the part with the cone, it'll move in here just a little bit. I've got it over towards that front edge to your right. And if we look over here on the left, I can see my groove right there. It's right up on the edge for that snap ring. So that's telling me that that shaft is in far enough. When I hit it just a second ago, it was not moving. So that would be my really only reference point right here to know that I'm in where it needs to go. So I'll go ahead and kind of work that snap ring on there, and then I'm going to check, see what my torque specs are, and then I'll go ahead and get this bolt right here on the inside torqued, and then we'll be ready for that cap. So I'll be right back. All right, so I checked in the book, and there are not any torque specs for this cap screw right here. You just tighten it up when the end cover is in place. That will prevent it from backing off. If you note, there's no seal in there either, and so what they say to do with that is to go ahead and put some sealer around the edges of your cap. Let me clean some of that off from earlier. So I'm just going to run that around through there. I'm just gonna wipe this on so we get good and sealed. And we'll just kind of start to get that thing in place here. All right, I'm gonna grab my mallet and we'll go ahead and drive that in place. Okay. No big deal there, got that done. I'll let that excess stuff clean up. Now, one thing you want to do is make sure that you got good free travel, and I do. That can be changed by how tight you load this bearing as well as your shims up here on that top cap. So everything feels good with where we're at right there. So our next step will be sealing up the gear here on the drive gear for the bottom where we have our oil, and they do make a cork gasket like this one that'll fit on there. So I just kind of want to dry fit to make sure I get my Permatex where it needs to go. We'll do the same thing here in just a second on the bottom cover. So I'm just going to push this in place, make sure all my holes are lined up. All right, everything looks good there. And like mentioned before, I spent several hours cleaning, so you want to make sure that you get all your surfaces nice and clean. And I'm going to go through here and put Permatex on this side as well. All right, got that done. I've got my bolts ready. So I'm just going to kind of ease this in place. Move it around just a little bit so that we got all of it on both surfaces. And this bottom cover, if you're doing both of them, don't worry about getting your covers mixed up, because it'll only go on one way. Your drain is always to the inside for obvious reasons. All right, everything looks great. All right, So that's got our cover back on. So what's next? The dreaded brake drum. So in order to get the brake drum on, it's got to be heated. We saw that thing coming off. I had a lot of pressure pulling that, but we got it off of there. First thing, we've got to put the snap ring on, and that was not fun getting that thing off. But so we'll get that snap ring on, we'll put our key in, and then I'm gonna have to heat up that drum with my torch, and hopefully it'll expand just enough for me to get that thing slid on there easily and not have to try to drive it. So that's gonna be our next step here. So I'll go ahead and get started with that. All right, so I've got the snap ring installed now and the keyway, and I've cleaned up this whole area here that the drum's gonna be sliding on. And then over here on my other vise, I've got my brake drum set up. This is the back side. This is where your key is gonna, or your snap ring rather, is gonna fit, and your keyway's at the top. So the next step on this is I'm just gonna heat it up. Well, don't know what that was. I hope that thing didn't crack. Sure did. I don't know. Yeah, it'll slide right on there, but man, that thing is busted. So you can see where it cracked it right there. So I got it too warm, evidently. And then I want to zoom in. There's a hairline crack right there. Right there. So I don't know if I'm going to go ahead and put that thing on there and take a chance of that coming off or not. But not too happy about that. It's still plenty warm to get back where it needs to be. I don't know. I hate that that cracked. Just trying to think what the chances are. I don't think it's going to affect any of the operation of the brake at all. I know for sure it's not, because we're not any wider. We just got that crack. As long as nothing else breaks off in there. If something breaks off in there, now we're a different story. It is pushed back on all the way back as far as it needs to go. It's up against the snap ring. All right, I'm gonna let that cool. I'm gonna leave it. I'm not gonna spend another $100 and $200, whatever it is, for one of these. I'm just gonna use that, take my chances on it. Okay, so pretty much at this point, we've got that complete rear axle rebuilt. We've got the new seals in there. A new gasket on the pan down there at the bottom. Still need to get my oil in that, which isn't a big deal. Put a new bearing in there as well. So I guess our next step is going to be assembling it onto the housing of the tractor. So we'll get set up for that, and we'll go ahead and we'll install that, and then we'll be ready for brakes. All right, so I got my axle strapped up and moved over here to the rear end, and the whole middle section, I guess, of the tractor here. We're going to go ahead and put that axle in place. You can tell the shaft there is a little bit shiny. I've went ahead and lubed that up, and I've also lubed up my new seal that we put in a while back. So really, it's pretty straightforward here. We're just going to spin this axle around, and I'm going to slide it in place, and we're going to get it lined up right here going into the rear end. So we want to be a little cautious when we do this, because we want to make sure that we do not damage that new seal. And I've just got my cherry picker over here, so we'll kind of start sliding this thing in. I'll get my alignment set up here. I feel like I need to go up just a little bit. All right, so we're started in to the rear end there. I'm just going to lift up just a little bit on the back here. Ease it in there. Okay. And then over here on this side, we're just going to line up with our bolt. I twist that just a little bit to get the two studs to align. So I'm just going to stand behind this and just twist it like that until I'm lined up with those studs. And I may need to twist it just a little bit to get us lined up internally. Just like that. And then this thing will just slide right on there. Okay, so we got the two studs sticking out there, and I'm just going to go ahead and I put new lock washers on everything, so we got that situated. And what I'm going to do is just draw this in because there's some corrosion right there that didn't get cleaned off, and so it's not wanting to go on and tighten up there. So. So that's about it. There's really not much more to it than that. Probably the most critical part is just making sure that you don't damage your seal on the way in. So there's our brake drum. The next video after this one, we'll be putting the brakes back in this. So I'll go over step by step in that video on how to install them and get your pin and get your brake rod and everything through the front of the housing. But anyway, so for now, that will conclude our video of the installation of the installation and the rebuild of the rear axle on this WD. It'll be the same on a WD-45 as well. And I'm sure there's some other models that are identical. But anyway, hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments section and I will respond to those. Hit like, subscribe, share the video, and thanks for watching. Until next time.